You know, my dear, some houses look fine from the outside, walls standing, doors shining. But inside, they echo with broken voices. That's the kind of home I grew up in. I was the third daughter out of 7 girls. And one brother, our sweet, quiet Momi. Back then, people said we were blessed with numbers. But I knew even as a child, blessings don't mean much when peace is missing. Our father was a tall, proud man, always dressed sharp, always talking loud, like he wanted the whole neighborhood to know he was in charge. But behind that voice was something dark, something cold. He never raised his hand in front of guests. Oh no, he saved that side of himself for when the doors closed. Then the air in the house would change. Even the walls seemed to shiver. My mother, poor soul, moved through that house like a ghost. She never shouted, never argued. She'd lower her head, bite her lip, and keep busy, cooking, washing, stitching old clothes for us girls so we wouldn't look too poor at school. She smiled sometimes, but it was the kind of smile that hurts to look at, a tired smile that says, "I'm trying to survive." I remember nights when we'd all sleep close together on the floor, 7 sisters and 1 brother, lined up like fragile birds. Momi would always let us rest our heads on his arm, whispering, "It's okay. Father's just tired. It'll be better tomorrow." He was younger than most of us, but carried comfort in his voice like an old man who'd already seen too much. Our father, though, he didn't like noise. If laughter spilled out of our room, he'd bang on the wall. If the rice wasn't cooked just right, he'd slam the plate and walk out, leaving my mother trembling. And yet she'd never say a word against him. Not one. Sometimes I'd watch her sitting by the stove, eyes empty, hands shaking, and I'd wonder, why doesn't she just leave? But where could she go? A woman with 8 children and no money? In those days, women didn't have choices. Their world began and ended with the man they married. My earliest memory of fear was a dinner night when father came home drunk. We were all sitting quietly, eating in the corner, when he threw his shoe across the room. It hit the wall so close to Momi's head that the sound still rings in my ears. Momi didn't cry, didn't flinch. He just stood up, walked to father and said softly, "Please, Baba, don't shout. Mama isn't feeling well." And father, oh, he laughed, that cruel laugh that still chills my bones, and said, "Look at this little man trying to protect his mother." Then he walked out, leaving the smell of alcohol and anger behind him. That night, after everyone slept, I saw Momi outside the window, staring at the stars. I crept out quietly and asked, "What are you thinking about?" He whispered, "If I study hard, maybe I can buy Mama a house one day, a quiet house with no shouting." I was only 8, but I remember those words more clearly than my own name. Because even then, he wasn't dreaming for himself. He was dreaming for her, for us. As the years passed, the shouting grew louder and so did our silence. We learned to move around father like shadows, quick, unseen, careful. Each of us found small ways to escape. My eldest sister would pretend to go fetch water just to sit outside for 5 peaceful minutes. Another would hum softly while washing clothes, drowning out the noise of arguments. And I found my peace in listening to Mama's heart at night as we lay beside her. It always beat fast, as if it feared to stop. But I'd press my ear closer just to remind her she wasn't alone. Momi grew into a handsome young boy, tall and bright, but life didn't give him a childhood. While other boys ran to play cricket after school, he ran to help Mama at the market. He never complained, not once. If father yelled, he'd lower his eyes. If there wasn't enough food, he'd say he wasn't hungry. Even when his shoes tore apart, he'd stitch them himself and smile like it didn't matter. But deep inside, I could see the burden forming, a heavy, invisible weight that no child should carry. He was becoming the man of the house because the man who should have been never really was. Our house wasn't a home. It was a battlefield of unspoken wars. Each night we prayed that father would come home calm, that Mama wouldn't cry, that tomorrow might be different. But tomorrow always looked the same, another day of fear wearing a new face. And yet, amidst all that sorrow, we found tiny sparks of light. Sometimes Mama would tell us stories from her village, tales of kindness, of rivers and green fields, of a world where people laughed freely. We'd close our eyes and imagine we were there, far from the shouting, the slamming doors, the tears. Those stories were our escape, our little rebellion against despair. But you know what's strange, my dear? Even after all those years, I don't remember the pain as much as I remember the strength. Especially Momi's. He was our shield, our small flicker of hope in a house where hope wasn't welcome. If there was ever peace in that house, it was because he created it. So when people say children forget, I just smile sadly. Because I never forgot. Not the sound of Father's voice, not the trembling of Mama's hands, not the soft whisper of Momi promising things would get better. And maybe that's where my story truly begins. In that broken house, where love was fragile, fear was constant, and a little boy started carrying the weight of an entire family on his young shoulders. But we didn't know then that one day, that weight would crush him, and yet, he'd still stand tall, you know, my dear? Some people are born to shine loud, with voices that fill a room, and some shine quietly, like a lamp in the corner that keeps the darkness from swallowing you whole. That's who my brother Momi was, the quiet light in our storm. After Mama's tears became part of our nights and Father's temper became part of our days, Momi just stepped in. Not because someone told him to, but because love made him do it. He was only 16 when he started working. I still remember that morning. He pressed his old school books to his chest, stared at them for a long moment, then handed them to me. "Take them," he said softly. "You'll need them more." And before I could ask what he meant, he added, "I'm done with school. I'll help Baba in the shop," I cried, because I knew what that meant. It meant his dreams had just been folded up and put away forever. But he only smiled and said, "Don't cry, Ainee. I'll study later. Right now, Mama needs medicine." That was the thing about Momi. He never thought about himself. Every decision he made had someone else's name written on it. When Mama needed rest, he cooked. When we girls were scared, he'd tell jokes till we laughed. Even when Father shouted at him in front of neighbors, he'd lower his eyes and say, "I'm sorry, Baba," just to keep peace in the house. I used to wonder where all that patience came from. Maybe it was Mama's prayers. Maybe it was the way life had forced him to grow up too fast. But even patience has a cost, and I could see it collecting behind his smile. At night, he'd sit under the dim light, counting coins from the shop, whispering numbers under his breath. Sometimes I'd wake up and see him staring at Mama's medicine bottle, tears shining quietly in his eyes. He'd wipe them fast, thinking no one saw, but I did. I always did. Our father, meanwhile, had changed little. He'd spend more time outside, with friends, parties, gambling, women. When he was home, his voice filled every corner. He spoke like a man who owned the world, while Momi was the one keeping that world from collapsing. There was one day I can never forget. It was my eldest sister's wedding day. Father had promised to pay for everything, but 2 nights before the wedding, he disappeared, left the house with what little savings we had. No explanation, no money. Just gone. Mama fainted when she heard. The rest of us sat around her crying, terrified. And Momi, oh my brave brother, and he didn't cry. He just said, "Don't worry, I'll fix it." He sold his motorbike, his only thing of value, and walked the streets all day, borrowing, bargaining, begging. By evening, he came home with enough to make the wedding happen. When the music played, no one knew that the boy standing at the corner in a worn-out shirt had sacrificed everything to keep his sister's dignity safe. I saw him that night, sitting alone near the kitchen, drinking plain water while guests ate biryani. I asked, "Why aren't you eating?" He smiled. "I'm full, Ainee. Seeing everyone happy, that's enough for me." He always said things like that, words that broke your heart and healed it at the same time. But life didn't slow down for him. When the second sister's proposal came, he did the same. Worked extra hours, saved every rupee, sometimes skipping meals. Father barely showed up for the weddings anymore. He said such responsibilities were a waste. Yet Momi carried them all, one after another, without complaint. I remember asking him once, "Momi, don't you ever get angry? Don't you want to shout back at Baba?" He looked at me, half smiling, half tired. "What would that change, Ainee? If I shout, Mama will cry. If I stay quiet, at least she'll sleep tonight." That was his way, silence as sacrifice. He believed peace was something you could build with patience. But he never realized how much it was costing him inside. Still, he had his small joys. He loved photography, had an old camera he'd fixed himself. Sometimes on Sundays, he'd take us all to the park and click pictures. Me holding flowers, little Hina pretending to be a model, Mama smiling faintly in her worn shawl. For those few hours, we were just a family again. Not broken, not hurting, just together. He'd say, "One day I'll make real portraits, hang them on the walls of our own house." And Mama would reply softly, "May God make it so, my son." But dreams, my dear, are fragile things in a house full of anger. No matter how gently you hold them, they break if the air turns cold. And in our house, it was always cold. Then came the day Father announced he would marry again. Just like that. No discussion, no care for Mama, no shame for what it meant. He said, "A man deserves happiness," as if Mama had been his punishment all along. Momi stood there, pale, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. He just looked at Mama, whose face had gone completely white, and I saw in his eyes the quiet rage of a son who can't protect the one person who gave him life. That night, he sat outside till dawn, staring at the dark sky. When I brought him tea, he whispered, "Ainee, I'll protect everyone. I don't know how yet, but I will." And then, under his breath, almost like a prayer, "I just hope God gives me the strength." He didn't know that prayer would soon be tested, harder than he could ever imagine. Because when the walls of our home finally broke, when our world fell apart piece by piece, it was Momi who stood between us and the storm, and carried the weight of it all, without ever once complaining. You know, my dear, there are moments in life when you can actually hear a heartbreak. It doesn't make a loud sound, just a soft crack inside your chest that never really heals. That's what happened the night our world collapsed. Father's second marriage wasn't just a betrayal. It was the earthquake that split our family in two. He didn't warn us, didn't even speak to Mama. One evening, he came home with a strange woman, holding her hand like a trophy, and said in that cold, proud voice of his, "This is my new wife. Treat her with respect." I still remember Mama's face in that moment. She didn't shout, didn't faint. She just stood there, frozen, her lips trembling as if her soul was trying to leave her body quietly. Her hands, the ones that had cooked for him, washed his clothes, cared for his children, those hands just hung by her sides, lifeless. And Momi, oh, my poor brother. He clenched his jaw so tight I thought he'd break a tooth. But he said nothing. That night I couldn't sleep. I could hear the new wife laughing in Father's room, her bangles clinking, her voice too loud for a house that had known only sobs. Mama lay beside me, her body cold as ice. She whispered, "Ainee, I feel like I don't exist anymore." And I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone whose life has just been erased? The next morning, everything changed. Father ordered Mama to move into the small storage room at the back of the house. Her kitchen, now belonged to someone else. Even her prayer mat was thrown aside. The new wife filled the house with her perfume and her temper. She treated us like intruders, and Father, he allowed it. He said, "These are my daughters, not yours. Don't waste your time on them." Momi tried to stay calm. He worked longer hours, came home late, just to avoid the shouting. But I could see the fight in his eyes every time that woman insulted Mama. He'd look at me across the room as if to say, "Hold on, Ainee, just a little longer." Then one evening, it happened. The night the walls finally broke. Mama had spent all day coughing, her body too weak, her voice fading. When the new wife started yelling because the dinner wasn't ready, Momi lost his silence. He stepped forward and said, "Enough. She's sick. You can make your own food." Father's face turned red. "How dare you talk to her like that?" he shouted. Momi didn't back down this time. Because you won't protect her, Baba. Someone has to. For a moment, there was just silence, that dangerous kind that comes before a storm. Then Father slapped him. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. Mama screamed. I ran forward, but Momi didn't hit back. He just looked at Father, tears in his eyes, and said, I'm not afraid of your hands anymore. But one day, you'll be alone, and maybe then you'll understand what you destroyed. Father stormed out. The new wife smirked, and that hurt even more than the slap. That night, Momi packed his small bag and said he'd stay with a friend for a few days. He told Mama, don't cry, Ami, I'll fix this. I promise, but nothing was ever fixed after that. Days turned into weeks. Father rarely came home. When he did, it was only to argue or demand money. Mama's health worsened. Her cough grew deeper, her eyes darker. She stopped eating, stopped speaking much. Sometimes she'd sit by the window for hours, staring at the gate, whispering Momi's name. I used to bring her water and say, he'll come soon, Ami. And she'd smile faintly. I know, my child. He always comes back. Then one evening, Momi returned. He looked thinner, older, but determined. He kissed Mama's forehead and said, I found a job. A small one, but it'll keep us going. Don't worry anymore. For the first time in weeks, Mama's eyes lit up. She held his hand and whispered, You've always been my son and my strength. Don't let bitterness eat you, Momi. I thought maybe, just maybe, life would calm down again. But peace doesn't stay long in broken homes. Within days, Father came back and saw Momi's things in the house again. He shouted, Didn't I tell you to leave? This is my house now. And that woman, that cruel woman, said, Either he goes or I do. Father didn't hesitate. He pointed to the door and said, Get out. Momi stood still for a moment. Then he nodded, packed his bag quietly, and said to us, It's all right. Let him have the walls. We'll take the peace with us. He walked out with tears in his eyes, and Mama collapsed behind him, crying his name. I ran after him, but he turned back just once, smiled faintly, and said, Take care of her, Ainee. I'll send money soon. Tell her not to worry. That was the last night our family lived under one roof. After that, we were just pieces scattered by the wind. Momi working somewhere far away, Mama sick and fading, and me, trying to hold on to whatever was left of us. You know, my dear, people say homes break because of poverty or illness. But that's not true. Homes break because of cruelty, the kind that wears a familiar face. Ours broke quietly, room by room, until there was nothing left but dust and memories. And in that dust, I watched my brother's shoulders bend a little lower, his smile fade a little more, as he carried the weight of everything our father destroyed. When a man carries too much pain for too long, it doesn't show in his tears. It shows in his silence. And my brother Momi, he was the quietest man I've ever known. After Father threw him out, Momi started working wherever he could. He washed cars, lifted cement bags at construction sites, repaired old radios, anything that brought home a few rupees. Sometimes he'd come to see us secretly at night, standing outside the gate just to check if Mama had eaten. He'd never enter the house anymore. Said he didn't want another fight. I'd sneak out with food I'd saved from dinner. Stale bread, maybe a little rice, and he'd smile like it was a feast. He always said, Don't worry, Ainee, this storm will pass. But every time he said that, I could see the storm inside him growing stronger. Weeks turned into months. Mama's health got worse. The doctor said she needed better food, proper medicine, rest. But how could she rest when her heart was breaking every single day? She'd lie on her bed whispering Momi's name like a prayer, and sometimes I'd catch her staring at the door, waiting for him to walk in. Then one day, he did. He came home early in the morning, his clothes dirty, his face tired, but his hands full. He brought medicine, some fruit, and a soft blanket. He didn't even have shoes on, just old torn slippers. Mama cried when she saw him. She held his face and said, You shouldn't have come. Your father will... But he shook his head. Ami, I don't care anymore. You need me. That's all that matters. From that day, Momi made a promise to himself. He would take care of everyone, no matter what it cost him. He found a steady job at a small photo studio, learned photography by watching others, and slowly started earning enough to rent a single room nearby. He told me, "If I can't live in that house, I'll build a new one with my own hands, one that no one can throw us out of." But the weight he carried, oh my dear, it was heavier than the world itself. With father gone most days and the new wife ruling the house, Momi had to become the son, the father, and the protector all at once. He married off our elder sister, selling his old camera and some of his clothes to pay the dowry. Then another sister, and another. Each wedding was a mix of joy and sorrow. Joy for their future, sorrow for what Momi lost every time he gave away a piece of himself. I remember one night before a wedding, he sat outside under the dim light, counting the last few notes he had. I asked, "Do you have enough?" He smiled softly, enough for her smile. "That's all I need." He didn't just give money, he gave up his dreams. He once wanted to open his own studio, take portraits of families, of happy moments. But he said, "Maybe it's not my turn yet." Sometimes, late at night, I'd find him sitting alone, his head resting against the wall. He'd whisper to himself, "I just want them all safe. That's all." And I used to wonder, who comforts the one who comforts everyone? One winter he fell sick. High fever, coughing, barely able to walk. But even then, he refused to rest. He said, "If I stop working, we stop eating." He'd drag himself out of bed, take his old bicycle, and go to work in the cold. When I begged him to rest, he laughed gently. "Ainee, if I lie down too long, I might not get up again." And he was right. He didn't have the luxury to be weak. He carried too many lives on those shoulders. Mine, our sisters, Mama's. And he carried them without ever letting us feel the full weight. Then one day, father came back. Broke, angry, defeated. His second wife had left him, took his money, and vanished. He had nowhere to go. When he stood at our door that evening, trembling, I thought Momi would slam it shut. But no, he opened it wide. He said quietly, "You're still our father. Come inside." Even father didn't know what to say. Maybe for the first time in his life, he felt shame. That night, I sat in the corner and watched Momi bring him food, watched him treat the same man who had thrown him out with kindness. It broke something inside me. I whispered, "Why, Momi? After all he's done?" And he said, "Because hate is heavier than love, Ainee, and I'm already carrying too much." Those words stayed with me forever. That was my brother, gentle in strength, quiet in pain. He carried the weight of a broken home, a mother's illness, sister's futures, and even a father's guilt, all on his back, without once letting it crush his spirit. But I saw it, my dear. I saw his shoulders curve, his eyes dim, and his laughter fade into something that sounded more like exhaustion. Still, every morning he'd look at us and smile as if to say, "We made it through one more day. That's enough." He became our anchor, our light, our everything. And yet he never asked for anything in return. Not love, not thanks, not rest. Sometimes, late at night when I close my eyes, I can still see him walking down that dusty road, a bag slung over his shoulder, his back straight despite the weight, his heart heavy yet kind, and I whisper, "You carried us all, Momi. And I just hope the world gave you even a little of the peace you gave us. You know, my dear, some nights never end. They stay with you, not in memory, but in your blood. And for me, that night was the one when we lost our mother. It was a cold winter evening, the kind where the air feels heavy and the world goes quiet. Mama had been weak for days. Her cough had turned into something deep, painful, hollow. But she wouldn't tell Momi. She didn't want him to worry. I remember her sitting by the small kerosene lamp, her hands trembling as she tried to sew a torn pillow cover. I said, "Ami, please rest." She smiled faintly and whispered, "I can rest later, my child. Let me finish this before Momi comes home. He likes the bed to look neat." Even in sickness, she thought about her son's comfort. That was her love, quiet, endless and selfless. Momi came home late that night. His clothes were soaked from the rain, his face pale with exhaustion. He handed me a small packet, some bread, a little sugar and milk. "Boil this for Ainee," he said softly. "She needs strength." But when I looked at her, she was already lying down, breathing hard. Momi rushed to her side. He called her name, Ainee, Ainee, but she didn't open her eyes. Her lips moved slowly, like she was trying to say something. He leaned close, tears falling onto her blanket. And in that weak, fading voice, she said, "Momi, you've done enough. Rest now, my son." Those were her last words. I can still hear them, like they're echoing inside my chest even now. Momi froze. For a moment, he didn't cry. He just held her hand, whispering, "No, no, no. Not yet, Ainee, please, not now." But her hand had already gone cold, and then he broke. The boy who never complained, the man who carried us all, fell to the floor and cried like a child. He screamed her name until his voice cracked. He hit his chest and sobbed, "I wasn't here, Ainee. I was working. I should have been here." I tried to hold him, but he pushed me away gently, his face buried in her hands. He kept whispering, "She waited for me." I know she did. She waited. Outside, it started to rain harder, like even the sky was mourning with us. I remember sitting there all night beside them, watching Momi hold her lifeless hand, refusing to let go. In the morning, the neighbors came. Some helped prepare her body for burial. Father stood in the corner, silent, his face stiff. I thought maybe he'd say something, maybe he'd break down, but he didn't. He just lit a cigarette and walked out. That moment, something inside me turned cold. I realized that no matter how much we begged for love, it would never come from him. At the graveyard, Momi carried her body on his shoulders, the same shoulders that had carried all of us for years. He didn't let anyone else touch her. He said, "She's my mother. I'll take her myself," and he did. Through the muddy ground, the pouring rain, the crowd, he carried her like a baby, whispering prayers under his breath. When they lowered her into the earth, I saw his hands tremble for the first time. He stayed behind after everyone left, kneeling in the wet soil, his head bowed, his clothes drenched. He didn't move for hours. When I finally went to him, he looked up with red eyes and said quietly, "Ainee." She's gone, but I still feel her near me. I didn't know what to say. I just sat beside him, and we cried until our eyes ran dry. That night, when we returned home, the house felt emptier than ever before. No smell of her food, no soft voice calling our names, no warmth in the air, just silence. The kind that screams Momi didn't sleep for 3 days. He sat outside staring at the stars. He said she worked all her life for us, never asked for anything, and I couldn't even give her peace in her last days. I told him it wasn't his fault, that she left with pride in her heart, knowing her son was good. But he didn't believe me. He carried that guilt for years. You see, my dear, when you lose a mother, the world loses its softness. Food doesn't taste the same. Home doesn't smell the same. Even laughter sounds strange. Because no matter how old you grow, you'll always be a child in your mother's eyes. And when those eyes close forever, something inside you closes too. That night didn't just take our mother, it took Momi's light too. He still worked, still smiled for us, but there was a sadness behind his eyes that never left. And sometimes when I caught him looking up at the sky, I knew he was still talking to her. He'd whisper, "Ainee, I'm still trying," and I'd whisper back, "She knows, Momi, she knows. You know, my dear, life has a strange way of testing the kindest hearts. It never breaks the ones who deserve it. It breaks the ones who carry everyone else. And my brother Momi, he was one of them." After Mama's death, our home turned cold, not just the walls, but the hearts inside them. Father had changed, or maybe he had always been that way. But now there was nothing left to hide behind. No mother's soft voice to calm him, no gentle presence to remind him what love felt like. For a few weeks after the funeral, he acted quiet, distant, maybe even guilty. But soon, the old cruelty came crawling back. The second wife, oh, she was sharper than a knife. She filled his ears with poison. "She's dead because of them," she'd whisper, "because of that boy and those girls. They made your life miserable, and father believed her." As if all those years of her loyalty meant nothing. Momi kept working. He paid the house bills, bought food, and never once complained. Not even when father began locking the kitchen cabinets or taking money from his wallet. I used to tell him, "Brother, let's go. Let's leave this house, start over." But he'd say, "No, Ainee. This is our mother's home. I won't give it up. She lived here. Her prayers still live here. But prayers, my dear, they can't stop cruelty when it wears your father's face." One evening, we came home to find our belongings scattered in the yard. Our clothes, books, even Mama's old shawl, all thrown out. Father stood in the doorway, his eyes cold. He said, "I've had enough of this pity show. You're not my responsibility anymore." Momi stepped forward, confused. "What do you mean, Baba?" Father pointed to the new wife standing beside him, her arms crossed, her lips twisted in a cruel smile. "She's right. You don't belong here. This is her house now. Take your sister and go." The world went quiet. I felt my heart drop to my knees. Momi just stood there, frozen. He didn't shout, didn't beg. He just said, "This was our mother's house. You can't..." But before he could finish, Father slammed the door. Just like that. The sound of that wooden door closing. I still hear it sometimes in my dreams. It sounded like the end of everything. Momi picked up Mama's shawl from the ground and wrapped it around me. He didn't say a word for a long time, just stared at the closed door. Then finally he whispered, "Come, Ainee, let's go." We walked down that street like ghosts. No home, no money, nowhere to go. It was winter and the night air bit into our bones. Momi held my hand tightly as if to promise, "I won't let you fall." We found shelter in a small storage shed near the old bazaar. A friend of his allowed us to stay there for a few days. The roof leaked when it rained. The floor was cold, but at least we had each other. Momi kept saying, "We'll be all right, Ainee. I'll find work tomorrow." And he did. He worked in the mornings unloading trucks, and at night cleaning dishes at a roadside cafe. He'd come back with cracked hands, sore feet, and still smile at me as if we were the richest people alive. But one night, I saw him sitting alone outside, staring into nothing. I asked softly, "Are you okay, Bai?" He smiled faintly. "I'm just tired, Ainee, but don't tell the stars. They already pity us enough." That made me cry. He laughed gently and said, "Hey, don't waste your tears. We'll need them later when we're happy again." Days passed. We learned to survive. Sometimes the cafe owner gave us leftover food. Sometimes we went hungry, but Momi never let me lose hope. One day, as we walked past our old house, I stopped and looked at the gate. Our gate, once ours. Father was standing there smoking. He saw us and turned his face away. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he hated us so much. But Momi just said, "Leave it, Ainee. Don't let his bitterness live in you. We've got enough weight already." And we walked on, like strangers passing the grave of someone they once loved. You know, my dear, the hardest thing in life isn't hunger. It isn't pain. It's being unwanted by the very people who are supposed to love you most. That night, as we lay on the cold floor of that shed, Momi whispered, "One day, we'll build a house, Ainee. Not big, not fancy, just warm, a place where no one will ever throw us out again." I nodded, pretending to believe it. But deep down, I was afraid. Because sometimes dreams sound too fragile when spoken in the dark. Yet somehow, he made me believe again. He always did, and I'll never forget that night when he held my hand and said softly, "We may be thrown out like strangers today, but one day, Ainee, we'll walk into our own home as a family again." At the time, I thought he was just trying to comfort me. I didn't know that he meant every single word, and that the journey to make it true would cost him everything. People often think survival is loud, full of cries, shouts, and noise. But that's not true. Real survival is silent. It happens in whispers, in the clinking of an empty plate, in the quiet sound of a man breathing through exhaustion, trying not to wake his little sister beside him. That was our life. Me and my brother, Momi. After Father threw us out, we started from nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean not even a pillow to rest our heads on. Just two hearts that refused to give up. We found a small, broken-down room behind a repair shop. The roof leaked, the walls were cracked, and when it rained, water trickled through like tears. But to us, it was a home. Because this time, no one could throw us out. Every morning before sunrise, Momi would leave for work. Sometimes it was unloading crates at the market, sometimes sweeping the floor at a cafe, sometimes helping a mechanic in exchange for a meal. He never complained, not once. He'd just say, "Work is work, Ainee. As long as it's honest, it's good." And me? I'd wait all day, sitting by that small window, watching the street, praying for him to come back safe. Sometimes I'd take small stitching jobs from the neighbors, mending old clothes, sewing buttons, just to help with a few coins. We were tired, hungry, and broke, but we had each other. One night, Momi came home late. His hands were bruised, his clothes stained with grease. I ran to him, panicked. "What happened?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing, just slipped a tool at work." "Don't worry." Then he handed me a small paper bag. Inside was half a piece of bread and one boiled egg. He said, "You eat first, Ainee. I'll eat later." But I knew he hadn't eaten all day. So I tore the bread in two and said, "Half for you, half for me." He tried to argue, but I pushed it into his hand. That's how we survived, by sharing even the smallest crumbs. You know, hunger does strange things to people. It makes them cruel, but it made us kind. We learned to smile even when our stomachs were empty. We learned to dream even when the nights were long. We learned to be grateful for the smallest mercies, a dry floor, a cup of tea, a moment of peace. Sometimes Momi would hum old songs while fixing a broken radio. He had a soft voice, one that could make even sadness sound beautiful. And when I'd ask why he sang so much, he'd say, "Because silence gets too heavy sometimes." There were days we couldn't afford rent. The shopkeeper threatened to throw us out more than once. Momi would beg for another week, another chance, and he always found a way. He started doing photography again, borrowing an old camera from a friend. He took pictures of street children, shopkeepers, fruit stalls, anything he could. Sometimes people paid him, sometimes they didn't, but he never lost hope. One evening, while cleaning his camera, he said, "One day, Ainee, I'll buy my own. A real one. And I'll take pictures of happy people, not the tired ones like us." I smiled. "And what about your picture, Pi?" He laughed softly. "My picture? Who'd want that?" I told him I would. "Because no one in this world works harder than you." He just smiled and looked away. There were hard nights, too many. Times when the power would go out, and we'd sit in darkness, counting the coins we had left. Times when rainwater would flood our room, and we'd sit on the bed, lifting our feet, trying to stay dry. And through it all, Momi never complained. He'd just say, "Tomorrow will be better, Ainee. It has to be." And somehow that kept me going. Because when you have someone who still believes in tomorrow, you start believing too. But the world can be cruel to quiet people. When others mocked him for his torn clothes, he just smiled. When they laughed at him for taking small jobs, he said, "They can laugh, but their laughter won't feed them." That was Momi. Steady, humble, and unbreakable. Still, I could see the toll it was taking on him. His shoulders slumped a little more each day. His hands grew rough, his eyes, they lost some of their light. But when I'd ask if he was tired, he'd pat my head and say, "Not yet, Ainee. Not until you're safe." You know, there's a kind of love that doesn't need words, just actions. And my brother's love was like that. He didn't say, "I love you." He showed it every single day, through every single sacrifice. Then, one winter evening, something unexpected happened. As Momi was returning from work, he saw a little boy crying on the roadside. The boy's father had been hit by a car. Everyone walked past. No one stopped. But Momi did. He carried the man to the hospital, stayed there all night, and paid for the medicine with his own earnings. When the man recovered, he turned out to be a small business owner. He offered Momi a job, part-time assistant, helping with photos for his online store. That was the first spark of change. A small light in the long tunnel we'd been walking through, but at the time, we didn't know it was the beginning of something bigger. We were still too busy surviving in silence. One breath, one prayer, one day at a time. And that's the thing, my dear. Sometimes, the quiet survivors of today become the miracles of tomorrow. They just don't know it yet. That was us. Two broken souls, still standing, still breathing, still holding on to hope that maybe, just maybe, life would remember us again. Sometimes life tests you until you think there's nothing left inside you to give. But then, out of nowhere, a little light slips through the cracks. And if you're brave enough to notice it, that light can change everything. For us, that light was my brother, Momi. He had spent years carrying everyone's pain, Mama's, mine, the family's. His back was bent, his hands calloused, but his heart, still pure, still full of quiet fire. It all started the day that kind man from the hospital, the one Momi had helped, introduced him to the world of photography and online work. He said, "You've got a good eye, Momi. Why don't you learn this properly?" Momi didn't even have a proper phone then, but that night, he looked up free tutorials on a borrowed one. He sat under the streetlight, writing notes on a crumpled piece of paper, learning what exposure meant, what editing meant, how to make something beautiful out of something ordinary. And for the first time in years, I saw that spark in his eyes again. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was dreaming. He'd wake before dawn, go do his labor job till noon, then spend the evenings practicing photography with that old camera he'd been given. He'd take pictures of street vendors, children playing, sunsets reflected in puddles after the rain. And when I'd look at those photos, I'd whisper, "Hi, you make even sadness look beautiful." He'd smile and say, "Maybe that's because we've seen too much of it. Ainee, I know how to find light in dark places." Slowly, things began to change. One day, he got an offer to take photos for a small clothing shop. They paid him enough to buy new shoes, his first pair in years. I still remember how he looked at them like they were made of gold. Then came the second miracle. A young boy from the shop told Momi about YouTube, how people shared videos of their work and earned money online. At first, Momi laughed. He said, "Who'd watch a man like me with my broken shoes and cracked hands?" But the boy said something that stuck with him. "They don't care about shoes, Uncle. They care about stories, and my brother had plenty of those." He borrowed a small second-hand phone and began recording. Just small things at first, fixing an old chair, repairing a broken fan, helping the neighborhood kids with schoolwork. He didn't even know how to edit videos properly. But he kept learning, every night, watching tutorials, listening to advice, and never giving up. A few months later, one of his videos, a simple one about repairing an old radio, suddenly got thousands of views. He couldn't believe it. He kept refreshing the page like a child waiting for candy. And when the first tiny payment came in, he held that money in his hands and whispered, "This isn't just money, Ainee. This is hope." I cried that night, not because of the money, but because after so many years of silence, I finally heard my brother laugh again. You could feel it in the air. The heaviness that had hung over us for so long was starting to lift. Momi began teaching himself more, photography, video editing, even TikTok trends. He said, "If I can learn, anyone can. The world is wide, Ainee. We just never saw it before." And I watched him bloom. That same boy who once carried bricks under the sun now carried a camera, capturing life through his lens. The same man who once walked barefoot through mud now taught others how to find their purpose. He even bought Mama's old scarf from a local thrift store, one that looked just like hers, and placed it near his desk. He said, "She couldn't see me succeed, but maybe she can feel it from where she is." I can't describe what it felt like to see him like that. There was still struggle, yes. We still had bills, still had worries. But now there was hope. And that's more powerful than any luxury. You see, my dear, when life finally gives you a little sunshine, you don't waste it. You let it warm every cold memory, every broken piece of your heart. Momi started helping others too, teaching young boys from the neighborhood how to film and edit. He said, "If I can save one person from the pain I went through, then maybe it was all worth it." That's how the world began to notice him. Small opportunities, small smiles, small wins, but they piled up, one after another, like stepping stones leading us out of the storm. And I remember one night, as we sat outside under the stars, he looked up and said softly, "You know, Ainee, maybe this is what Mama meant when she said, 'Patience brings blessings.'" I looked at him and smiled through tears. Yes, Pi, this is her blessing. Because truly, after every night of pain, the dawn always comes. Quiet, gentle, but certain. And for the first time in years, we weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. People often talk about survival like it's a victory. And yes, it is. But what they don't tell you is, every victory comes with a cost. We survived. But we lost so much along the way. Time, dreams, laughter, youth. Things you can never buy back. Momi's work had started to bring in a little money. The YouTube channel was growing. The photography jobs were steady. People who once looked down on us now spoke our names with respect. And I'll admit, it felt good. For the first time in years, we could eat without counting every grain of rice. We could sleep without fearing the landlord's knock at dawn. But the silence that followed those small successes wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like an old wound that had healed on the outside but still throbbed deep within. Some nights, I'd find Momi sitting alone, staring at the wall, his hands still, his eyes distant. I'd ask, "Pi, what's wrong?" And he'd smile that sad smile, the one that always broke my heart, and whisper, "Nothing, Ainee." I'm just thinking, but I knew. He was thinking of Mama, of all the days she went hungry so we could eat, of the nights he worked in silence while Father slept peacefully beside his new wife. He was thinking of what could have been, the life he might have had if love and kindness had lived in our home. And I understood. Because I thought of it too. We had both grown older than our years. Our faces carried lines long before time should have drawn them. Our laughter, when it came, sounded rusty, like it had forgotten the way out. You see, child, survival isn't free. It demands pieces of you. It takes your softness, your innocence, your trust, and by the time you realize it, you've already traded too much. I remember one evening, Momi came home with a new camera, his first real professional one. He held it like a newborn baby, and yet I could see the tears in his eyes. He whispered, "Do you know how long it took to get here, Ainee? 20 years. 20 years of pain for this one moment of peace." I didn't say a word. I just hugged him, because sometimes words only make the ache worse. Our small home began to fill again, not with things, but with meaning. Laughter returned slowly, shyly, like a bird testing if it was safe to sing again. We cooked together, we smiled more, but there was always that quiet space, the space where Mama should have been, and where our childhood had once lived. People saw our progress and said, "Look how strong they are." And yes, we were strong. But strength, my dear, isn't something you choose. It's something life forces on you when you've got no other choice. Sometimes I'd walk past our old house, the one Father threw us out of. It had new paint, new curtains, new people living inside. But for me, it was still haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. By the sound of Mama's voice calling me for dinner, by Momi's laughter echoing through those walls, and I'd wonder, was it worth it? All the years of pain, the sleepless nights, the hunger, just to stand here now, breathing, surviving. Then I'd remember Momi's words. Even pain is a teacher, Ainee. It showed us who we are, and maybe he was right. Because without all that, we wouldn't know the value of peace, the beauty of small joys, or the strength that hides in quiet hearts. still. Sometimes at night, when the lights go out and the world goes still, I close my eyes and imagine another life, one where Mama lived longer, where Father had a kind heart, where Momi didn't have to grow old before his time. It's not regret. It's just a whisper of what could have been, but then I remind myself, we made it. We lived through things that could have broken anyone else. And though we carry scars, we also carry stories. Stories that might help someone else survive their darkness. So yes, my dear, survival has a cost. But if you can walk out of the fire still holding love in your heart, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. You know, my dear, some peace doesn't come in your youth. It doesn't arrive when you beg for it or cry for it. It comes quietly, like the evening breeze that touches your face after the storm has long passed. And by the time it reaches you, you're too tired to celebrate it. That's the kind of peace that came to us. Years had gone by. The pain of our childhood had turned into distant echoes. Still there, but softer now. Momi's work was steady. People respected him, looked up to him. He was known for his honesty, his quiet kindness, and maybe that was his greatest victory. I often sat on the porch, watching him edit his videos or plan new shoots. Sometimes I'd ask him, "Bye, are you happy now?" He'd pause, smile faintly, and say, "I'm content, Ainee. Happiness is a young man's dream. Peace, that's what I wanted, and peace he truly found. But oh, my dear, it came too late. He never married. He said he didn't want to bring anyone into a life that had already been so full of struggle. His heart belonged to our mother, to her memory, to the promise he'd made at her grave. He'd tell me, if she could see us now, she'd finally smile without worry. Sometimes I think she does. In the rustle of the wind, in the glow of the evening sky, she's there, still blessing us. We eventually moved to a small, peaceful town. Not a fancy place, just quiet, kind, and calm. We planted flowers in the backyard, and every morning Momi watered them before sunrise. He said, "They remind me that life keeps growing, even after loss." And I would sit by the window, knitting little sweaters for the neighborhood children, listening to the same radio Mama once loved. Every day felt slower, gentler. We no longer feared hunger or cruelty or shame. We had enough. And enough, my child, is sometimes more than happiness itself. But peace has a strange ache of its own. Because when things finally get calm, you start to remember everything you buried just to survive. Some nights I'd wake up and see Momi sitting on the porch, looking at the sky, whispering prayers. And one night, he said something that broke me. He said, "Ainee." I forgave Father. I turned to him stunned. After all those years, the pain, the humiliation, the cruelty, how could he forgive him? But Momi looked at me, his eyes soft, and said, "He was a broken man too. Maybe he didn't know how to love. If I keep hating him, I'll carry his poison forever." That night, I cried silently, because I realized forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final step to freedom. A few months later, Momi fell ill. The doctor said it was exhaustion, years of overwork and stress taking their toll. He never complained, not once. Even in pain, he smiled, saying, "Don't worry. Ainee, I've lived enough to call it a full life." I sat beside him, holding his hand the way he once held Mama's. And when he closed his eyes for the last time, he looked peaceful, like a man who had finally come home. After he was gone, I buried him beside our mother, just as he always wanted. I placed his old camera near his grave, because that's how he saw the world, through the lens of love, no matter how much pain it gave him. Now, every evening, I visit their graves. I bring flowers, yellow ones, his favorite, and I sit there talking softly, telling them about the children who play nearby, about the videos people still watch, about how their story has become a light for others. Sometimes I smile, sometimes I cry. But every time I walk back home, I feel lighter, because I know they're both at peace now. You see, my dear, we didn't get the kind of happiness others dream about. We didn't have riches or grand homes or endless laughter. But we found something far greater. We found peace. And though it came late, it came gently and it stayed. So if life ever breaks you down, remember this: even the hardest hearts can heal. Even the darkest nights end in dawn. And peace, though slow, though quiet, always finds its way home. And as I sit here today, the sun setting behind the old trees, I whisper to the wind, "Mama, Pai, we made it." Because in the end, surviving with love in your heart, that's the truest kind of victory.